Hi, everyone. Welcome to our daily Homeroom live stream. For those of you who are wondering what this is something we started a few months ago. It's really just a way to stay connected, have interesting conversations about education and other topics. And I'm super excited about today's conversation. I just had some macadamia nuts, so I'm going to drink some water before but, but sorry about that. There wasn't a lot of water in there. That's why I had to kind of lift it up high. But before I jump into our conversation with Jonathan Haidt, I'll give my standard announcement. A reminder that Khan Academy is a not-for-profit. We can only exist because of philanthropic donations. If you're positioned to do so, please think about it. And a special thanks to several corporations who stepped up in the last couple of months to allow us to accelerate our response to COVID. We were running at a deficit even before COVID, and that deficit has only grown. Special thanks to Bank of America, Google.org, AT&T, Fastly, and Novartis. And we're still running at a deficit. So any help, either as an individual or a corporation or a foundation, is much appreciated. So with that, I'm excited to introduce Jonathan. Jonathan, we've seen each other at several conferences. We even have some funders in common. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Sal. And let me also just say thank you for all you're doing for us parents during quarantine. My wife and I were pressuring my son to pick something to learn. So he went to Khan Academy and he's taking your JavaScript course. Thank you.
Well, we are honored to be of service. And for everyone listening, we're going to be taking questions for Jonathan and myself if you're interested. So please put the comments on YouTube or Facebook, wherever you're watching, and we have team members who will surface it. But Jonathan, you have a fascinating area of research. You are a social psychologist focused on the psychology of morality. What is that? And that'll help people start thinking of questions too.
Sure. Okay. Well, so morality refers to the fact that we're always judging each other. We don't just live in a physical world. We live in a world made of norms and expectations, and those keep us in line. They give us endless things to talk about, gossip about. They lead to conflict, endless conflict. But morality also makes possible cooperation. We're an amazingly cooperative species. Bees are more cooperative than us, but not a lot of other creatures. So cooperation and conflict, that's a lot of what I study. And that has brought me into the study of politics in particular. I used to look at how morality varied across cultures, and beginning as the culture war began to heat up in the United States in the 1990s and early 2000s, I began to look at how left and right are like different countries.
Yeah, and I definitely want to talk about that. I'm sure there's going to be questions about it. When you look at your three publications, kind of common everyday reader publications outside of academic, you have three books. One is The Happiness Hypothesis: Finding Modern Truth and Ancient Wisdom. I'd love your big takeaways there, and actually I'm curious how it's affected your life. Your other one is The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, and then most recently, The Coddling of the American Mind: How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. And so that'll also help prompt people to think about what questions to ask. But I mean, let's just go in order.
Okay.
From the happiness hypothesis, this is something I spend a lot of time thinking about how to optimize not only my own life, but how to optimize generally society so that we can be happier.
Right.
What are kind of your takeaways? I mean, how has it affected your personal life when you did this research and looked at ancient wisdom?
Sure. So what the book is, it grows out of my course at the University of Virginia. I taught there for 17 years, and I would try to present psychological insights to students, and I would often use quotes from the ancients, East and West. And I found that there's a small number of ideas that have been discovered in almost every society. Like there's nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so, as Shakespeare said. That's the basis of cognitive therapy. So I wrote a book, one truth in each chapter, and I reviewed what's the modern research on it. And the book wasn't supposed to be about happiness, but it turns out that if you take a lot of ancient wisdom, there are a lot of connecting threads on how to live a good life, how to flourish. And I'll save you all the trouble of buying the book. I'll summarize thousands of years in a couple of sentences. What it comes down to is happiness doesn't come from getting what you want. Okay, that's very short-lived. Happiness comes from within more so, that's better. But really the best way to summarize the human condition is that happiness comes from between. That is, it comes from getting the right kinds of relationships between yourself and others, yourself and your work, some sort of productive work, and yourself and something larger than yourself, having a sense that your life matters, you're part of something bigger. And if you get those three conditions right, you're going to be about as happy as you can be. So we all have a kind of a set point, a general level of happiness that we return to. But if you get those three conditions right, you'll sort of be, generally above that, at the high end of that range. So there you go, the secrets of happiness. Trust me, it's a lot more interesting when you go through it slowly. I shouldn't have just cut to the chase and given you the answer.
No, well, I think I have the book, and I encourage everyone to go through it. But there's a lot that I talk a lot about on this, about my own journeys, in meditation. But I do, and we also talk about how important it is to have a purpose and feel like you're, contributing to something larger. And so that definitely reinforces my existing beliefs. And as you also write about, confirmation bias, it's a very
I was just going to make that connection. That's right. It always feels good to be proven right, and it's awfully hard to prove people wrong.
Right. And then related to that, I think that gets into a lot of what you've been focused on lately, including with your not-for-profit, which is, it's clear that there's significant polarization. Politics is by definition always somewhat polarizing, but there is a sense, and you probably have evidence, that it is unusually polarized right now. I'd love I'd love if you have any evidence that it is truly, it's not just an intuitive sense, that it is, measurably unusually polarized right now. And also, what do you think are the sociological, cognitive reasons? And then maybe we could go into how do we depolarize, or if we think we should.
Sure. Okay. So, so as you said, politics is by nature polarizing. You have parties that represent groups of interests or identities or whatever, and then they compete. And elections are zero sum. So there's nothing wrong with that. And even some degree of polarization, like people are far apart on views, is not necessarily bad. But think of it this way. Suppose you have a sports league in which, the Yankees and the Red Sox hate each other, just, theoretically. That can actually make the game more fun. But suppose they hate each other so much that they start hiring hitmen to kill members of the other team, and they do things to sabotage the field. Okay, now you're totally out of bounds. Like, this is not what the game is. Okay, now let's turn to American politics. So there's some debate among political scientists about what polarization means. And if you think about views on policy issues like abortion, by some measures, we're not more polarized than we were. As a psychologist, I focus on one thing and one thing alone. That is affective polarization, which means emotional. How much do you feel emotion? How much do you hate the other side? That's what's crucial. And the data shows very clearly that in the 70s and 80s and even into the 90s, Republicans and Democrats, they rated the people on the other side, or the parties on the other side, sort of a little negative, but not at the bottom. And the ratings begin to get extremely negative in the late 90s is when it begins. And then it goes down and down and down. There is such hatred now that this has a lot of ramifications. One of which is we are now really willing to believe almost anything. If you hate the other side, you're much more willing to believe crazy stuff about them. So that's one whole piece, is rising polarization. And then let's add in the change in social media and in cable TV, so that we now have a media ecosystem that is really well designed to find the most anger-provoking, outrageous stuff. It can be total lies, but it's going to funnel it in. And so for a lot of reasons, we're now, we're in a democracy which has to have a public square in which ideas are hashed out, and we generally make progress and we improve ideas. That when sometimes there's compromise. I mean, that's what we need to do to live in a democracy. And I think it's much harder to do that now than it was even 10 years ago, to say nothing of 20 or 30 years ago.
And what do you think it was in the 90s, and then it sounds like it accelerated in the last 20 years, that caused this, I guess you could say, amplification of polarization or
yes.
Judgment of the other side?
Mess. Yeah. So, our minds like to look for a thing that happened. Like because you see the curves and they really do begin to dip in the 90s. And you might say, oh, well, it must have been, Newt Gingrich or Fox News. And at least that's what you would say if you're on the left. You'd certainly point to that. If you're on the right, I imagine you'd point to Bill Clinton. So, but what I like to do is these are complex systems that have a lot of parameters to them. And I like to think, well, what are the forces that are kind of pulling any complex system together, and what are the forces that are blowing it apart? And a lot of them began changing in around this time. For one thing, we have to see the late 20th century as an historical anomaly when our democracy had lots of problems, but we thought democracy was ultimately the way that everyone was going to live. Once the Soviet Union imploded, we thought, wow, liberal democracy with free market capitalism, like this is, the end of history. Everyone's going to go this way. What we didn't realize is that democracy is actually really, really hard. And the founding fathers and the Federalist Papers, they really worried about our tendency to faction, to split apart and hate the other side. So I'll just point to a couple of factors. One is the loss of a common enemy. So, from Pearl Harbor in World War II through the Cold War, having a common enemy really binds a group together. So that's a big one. Another really big one is the media environment. After World War II, we had 3 television networks that had a fairness doctrine. So they couldn't be very political. So for a while, we had a media system in which we kind of all got the same sort of news. And then once you get cable TV and then the internet and then social media, now you go from broadcasting to everyone so that we all hear the same stuff to narrowcasting. And of course, people using Facebook data and advertising data to, really micro target. So we're not on the same page. We don't believe the same things. We're in a state of moral and factual incoherence. And we may be that way for the rest of our lives. So those are a couple of big ones, but there are many others that began changing. And the result is hatred, distrust of each other, and distrust of institutions has been rising steadily to the point where it's, I think, extremely dangerous. It's really not clear what's going to happen to our country.
I know you're out in the business of predicting, but what do you think is what do you think is a natural extrapolation from where we are right now if you go out 5 or 10 years?
Oh boy. Put it this way. If current trends continue, then our country would probably fall apart in a catastrophic way. But please don't quote me. I know people are watching live. Please don't.
Wow, that's a stronger statement than I was expecting you to say.
Wait, I got to finish it. Because if current trends continue, then I think we'll be in big trouble. But the thing is, current trends never continue. They certainly don't continue forever. And if you zoom out, if you take the big picture and you look at both human history, in which life is getting better, rights are being extended, science advances, knowledge. In the big picture, life is getting better and better, and then there are dips, but then it keeps rising. Steve Pinker has books like The Better Angels of Our Nature. There are a variety of books that have really tried to encourage us to realize in every age, people think things are terrible and they're going to hell, but actually things are generally getting better. So it's always been wrong to bet against America. And I think in China and a few other countries, they are enjoying our mess, for geostrategic reasons. Odds are we'll figure a way out of this. My short answer is, I can't predict. I think there are a variety of scenarios in which things look even scarier and weirder, in the next year or two. But we're likely to find ways out of this. We have to solve a lot of problems. We've got to improve so many things about our democracy, the way we vote, the sense that people have a voice, gerrymandering. There's all these problems with our democracy, and I do hope that if things change politically next year, that democracy reform and improvement will be very high on the agenda.
Yeah, and you talk about the importance, I guess, of a common enemy to hold people a little bit closer together. And obviously, we are facing something of a common enemy in the pandemic. And from YouTube, Ishani Tarkar asks, do you think, well, this is more of an epidemiological question, do we think it'll have a second wave? And it sounds like it already is, frankly. But if we do, how do you think it'll affect society? Will it cause Democrats and Republicans to have a greater divide, or will they finally come together?
Yeah, so let's back up and go back to those halcyon early days of the pandemic when we were all trying to come to grips. It was inconceivable that we'd have to shut everything down and stay home for months. Inconceivable. And as we came to grips with it, and as that happened, it was like, oh my God, everyone is doing this. This is a global thing. And in those first weeks, that was the big question people were asking. Is this going to bring us together? But let's step back here. And understand what happens to societies. When you have a foreign attack, that brings people together. When you have a pandemic in history, that divides people apart. When we have a disease coming in, people are afraid of each other, there are shortages. So pandemics traditionally have actually split people apart. Now, this pandemic is different because we didn't have food shortages. It wasn't that deadly like the plague. I mean, it wasn't like, half the people were going to die. And it was an amazing shared experience. So in the early days, the polling showed many more people were saying we're all in this together. But here's the amazing and messed up and tragic thing about our country. Our culture war is so severe that it took about 4 or 5 weeks. By mid-April, the pandemic itself had divided the country. Now, I think a lot of that can be laid directly at the foot of the president, who was tweeting, liberate Virginia, things like that. So both the president, the media environment, within a few weeks, we had a left-right divide over wearing masks, over the speed of opening up, over so many other things. So I don't think that the pandemic will help or bring us together at a national level. Now, locally, lots of great stuff happens. So, you got to look at multiple levels. But overall, America has handled this pandemic horrifically, incompetently. And of course, you can blame many actors and agencies, but a portion of the story is our polarization. We don't trust each other or the authorities.
Yeah, and related to this, or maybe not, I mean, you tell me, your most recent book, The Coddling of the American Mind, has this played into this polarization? Has the polarization played into that? Or is that just another, orthogonal dimension to what's going on in society?
Yeah. Well, so briefly, the Coddling of the American Mind is about the big changes that we began to see on campus and in high schools as Gen Z came in. Gen Z, people born 1996 or 1997, depending on how you count it, but around then, mid-90s. Their childhoods are different from the millennials, and their mental health profiles are different. They have much higher rates of anxiety and depression. Nothing else, really, just anxiety and depression. And
how much higher? Is that well documented?
Yes, rate? Very well documented. Yes, if you go to thecoddling.com, somewhere on the front page, I have a link to a giant Google Doc where I've collected all the studies showing, on any side as to, is it rising? And then a second document, is social media a part of the cause? And when we started this is originally, the insight was from Greg Lukianoff. When we started this with an Atlantic article in 2015, everyone on campus or campuses across the country were talking about the rise of mental health needs, but we didn't have any hard data on it. And by 2016, 2017, now all the survey data was showing this is real. And it's not just self-report. It's not just that Gen Z is comfortable talking about it, because you find the same increase for self-harm, and you find a similar increase on suicide. So this is behavior. It's not just changes in diagnostic criteria. So we're trying to understand why that is. And as I said, a portion of it, especially the sex difference, may be or seems to be due in part to the effect of social media, especially on middle school kids. Social media really changes around 2011, 2012 or 2009 to 2012. But the other piece is the vast overprotection that Americans put on kids, and it happened in Canada and Britain too. We stopped letting them out to play as much. We got really scared about abduction, and we overprotected kids. And what kids most need to grow socially is free play, unsupervised free play, where they get in conflicts, they work things out themselves. So that's what that book is about. And no, I don't think it doesn't tell us much about the pandemic. But yes, we should definitely talk about it as an educational nonprofit. I don't know if I don't actually, Sal, are you seeing any signs of this? I mean, your audience is mostly, I would guess, Gen Z. Are you seeing signs that Gen Z is different from millennials or old previous generations?
Well, the very nature of Khan Academy, we are, removed physically. So we're only engaging in, kind of through the exercises or the videos that they might watch. So we don't see it as directly. There's other, kind of non-Khan Academy outlets where, at least as a, I hate to admit it, but now as a middle-aged person, I'm like, oh, these youngins now.
Welcome to the club. Yes. Yeah.
they're and I wonder whether this is just something that every, generation goes through, once all of a sudden you turn 40 and all of a sudden you think you're not that different than a 25-year-old, but you realize that cultural difference, or maybe they're just like I was when I was 25. I'm different now when I'm 40.
Yeah. Yeah. No, each, it's true that each generation thinks the one behind it is, lazy, or, every generation criticizes the one behind it. And often the criticisms are the same across thousands of years. So you're right to wonder that. But if you look at the mental health data, something really happened around 2012 is when the lines began going way, way up for girls and up not as much, but up still also for boys. So these are objective measures of mental health in terms of those that are behavioral. So it is. The other thing I can say is, I've spoken about the book at many high schools and universities to Gen Z audiences, and I lay out the case. Here's what we think is happening. And I always ask them, "Do you think this is right?" Or I just said something, painted your generation a certain way, and overwhelmingly they say it's a correct portrait because they recognize the effects of overprotection and of being on social media so heavily. Gen Z is not in denial. What I've seen is they generally want a broader range of experience. They want to be exposed to ideas. They want to grow up to be stronger and successful.
And so you have these two factors. The social media, just to make sure I understand it, these would have been kids who are essentially entering adolescence around 2012, 2013, right. Which is right when, obviously, social media had already started to gain momentum, but around 2012, 2013, it became huge. Your Facebooks, your Instagrams, Snapchats of the world. And what do you think is this, how does social media connect? And there's a question, if I can still find it, where someone was asking, I think it's off of YouTube, do you think that is it a net negative that social media or is it, are kind of some balancing influences?
Sure. So the important thing that people need to understand about social media is that it really changed in 2 years. So it comes out, you get, MySpace and Friendster and the Facebook around 2004. And it's, here I am, here's my picture, here are the bands I like, here are, my links to my various friends. That's not toxic. That's not bad for anyone's mental health. In 2009, Facebook adds the like button and Twitter adds the retweet button. And now there's a huge amount of information on engagement. And everybody is reinforcing everybody else. It's almost like an operant conditioning experiment, with James. Anyway, the behaviorist conditioning experiments. And so you have so much engagement data now. The platforms use that to algorithmicize what they feed, and so now social media becomes much more addictive. It lures many more people in, and it creates an outrage machine. That is, now it's very easy to drop something in, it spreads. And so by 2012, the media environment is different. Now the newspapers, the old line media, has to play the game. Advertising shifts onto Facebook. By 2014, this thing is so powerful that the Russians, who've been messing with our democracy since the mid 20th century, the Russians activate all their networks to make us even more angry at each other and put in a lot of lies and a lot of manipulation, a lot of fake sites. So 2014, now it's like we've got this, where our public square is this outrage machine being directly manipulated by other countries and by bad actors within this country. And so I think that's when 2014, 2015 is when our politics really felt like it was going haywire. And this, I believe, is made possible an opening for Donald Trump, who I don't think could have been elected in a normal election year, but he was very skilled at using this free media. So I just want to make the point. People have to understand it's not just like, being on social media. It's being enmeshed in this stream of constant judgment and outrage, and it's exhausting. And it's especially bad I believe, for middle school kids. So I'm not taking a position on whether adults should use it. But I think 11, 12, 13-year-olds really should not be on it. They certainly should not be on it without the permission of their parents. But at present, anyone can sign up for an account. There's no verification. And you see kids get sucked into this, and the chronic anxiety about being judged about conflicts, high cortisol levels, extended over days, weeks, months, is bad for development.
And this is really interesting because just as an observer, I think a lot of people will say, "Oh, yeah, social media, it makes you insecure, maybe anxious because you see other people's best lives. They're going on vacations, they look perfect in the morning, et cetera, and then you feel insecure about your very real life." You're saying, and maybe that's part of it, but you're saying it's something a little bit different, is that it's reinforcing views in a bubble and allowing to feel kind of moral outrage about another, and the other is not even in your bubble, so they're not even in a position to kind of defend themselves. And so that causes the anxiety, because you just look at that, you're like, I can't believe there's half the country or half the world that is that crazy, that they're after me, they're after people I care about.
Yeah. Wait, not exactly. Let me separate two different things. There's the mental health effects, which seem to be especially prominent in early adolescence and especially in girls. So when social life went from lots of face-to-face getting together with your friends to doing it online, where there's constant judgment and anything can explode, that I think is particularly bad for teen mental health. That's one piece of it. Then there's the democracy piece, which is not about kids, and it's not about anxiety. It's about anger and the ability to find truth. And so that is a part of the reason I think that our democracy is going haywire, and why we're seeing some similar movements in many Western countries. There's all kinds of economic causes too. I don't want to oversimplify, but I was born in 1963. I'm a product of the 20th century. My generation, we were raised to believe democracy is the greatest thing. It conquered. It was better than all other systems. And if you're born in 1996 and all you've seen is the 21st century, it's not so clear that democracy is this great thing. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying it's not working that well these days. And it's not just in America that it's happening. And I think social media is a part of it. It's not, it's not most of it, but it is an accelerant. It just makes, it's exactly what the founding fathers feared, that faction and conflict will spread like wildfire.
And so and these are two fascinating threads that are probably related to the mental health thread, what's just healthy for young kids, and then what that may be doing, broadly to a generation, maybe if that's playing a role in our polarization. There's several questions here. I just saw it. There's so many questions, I'm having trouble scrolling, but there's a question about, what recommendation would you have for parents of adolescents?
Mm-hmm.
Do you take them off of social media? Do you teach
so
them to meditate so they don't care?
Yeah. So, the easy thing would be to say, don't let your kid have social media until they're 16 or 18. That would be, an easy thing to say, but it wouldn't work. So the first thing is to differentiate between screen time and social media. So it's not screens per se that are bad. So spending time on Khan Academy, and of course you should get some exercise during the day, but, spending hours learning coding is not bad for you in any way. That's, so it's not screens. It's specifically social media where you're making content and then you're looking who said what about it, what are people thinking of it? So it's specifically social media, and the effects seem biggest on younger adolescents. So my advice, okay, and then the third thing to add in here is we're all trapped in a game. We're all trapped in a situation in which, when I told my son when he started 6th grade that he couldn't have Instagram, he said, but almost everyone else in my class has it. So it was harder for my son. Very few people wanted their kids on, but we're all trapped. And every parent says, well, okay, if everybody else is on it, I'll let you on it. So I think we have to have leadership from middle school principals. We have to have leadership. Parents have to get together. We have to have a common agreement to keep kids off of social media, at least until high school. I think that's the clearest thing is it should not be in middle schools. Kids should have it's hard enough to be in middle school with all the gossip and all the changes and all the growth and all the embarrassment. Get it out of middle school. And I think we would then see the rates of anxiety and depression. I think they would come down somewhat.
Yeah.
And one more thing.
Parents, go ahead.
Sorry. I would just say also for parents, I think it's also important to talk with your kids about what kind of childhood they want, because as far as I've found, Gen Z is actually pretty reasonable, and they many of them don't want to spend their whole lives online, and so helping them set limits because you've got all these psychologists in Silicon Valley working so that if you give your kid a device, they'll stay on it. So this makes no sense to give your child's time over to this psychologist in Silicon Valley. You and your child should decide, and then use the Apple screen time controls or whatever. I think those work very well. And also agree on a time that devices come out of the bedroom. That I think is very, very important. Otherwise, kids get sucked in at night. They're doing it. It can interfere with sleep. It just can go on forever.
Do they really hire psychologists at social media companies to figure out how to drive the addiction factor up, or the?
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, yes. I mean, the psychology of slot machines, the psychology of engagement. Oh yes, they hire a lot of psychologists. There's a lab at Stanford that trained a lot of designers in how do you hook people, how do you keep them on your product. Yes.
Yeah, and we do a little bit of that work. Obviously, we think we're doing it for good purpose, for how to hook someone onto learning or engagement. But that's, we don't have a team of, cognitive scientists, but maybe we should.
Well, so if your goal is to help them finish a lesson and reach a goal that they themselves endorse, then that's just
Yeah.
good psychology. There's I'm sure you have all kinds of points and rewards built in. That's good psychology. It's when you're trying to undercut their own resolutions and trying to keep them on even longer than they'd like to be on. So if you look at the regret factor, how happy are you with the time that you spend on Khan Academy? I would guess. Excuse me. Hello. Oh, say hello to the live audience. Okay.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hey.
Okay. So I would guess that if you ask kids how happy are you with the time, do you wish you spend, do you feel like you spend too much time on Khan Academy? Well, okay, if the parents are forcing them, maybe they'll say it's too much. But if it's self-driven, they'd be happy with it.
Yeah. No, I mean, these conversations, we could talk for several hours, and hopefully we can have you back on, because each of these threads, I think we can double and triple and quadruple click on. Maybe just to kind of finish up, maybe on a positive note, I know you're above and beyond your academic research and your writing. You're involved in, trying to change, maybe at least not only observe, but maybe depolarize society. We have this question from Facebook, Kathy Gifford Vance. What positive actions can individuals take to mitigate some of the negative impact of increasing polarization? So yeah, what should we do collectively or individually?
Oh, good. Thank you, Kathy, for that question. So a lot of the big changes are going to be systemic changes in elections and media and all sorts of things. But all of us as individuals, all of us are caught up in a system that makes us hyper-moralize. And so to go back to the happiness hypothesis, one of the great truths is that we're too judgmental. Here, let me see. Actually, wait, I actually have some quotes here. Let's see. This is something you hear from all over, judge not lest ye be judged. Buddha says, hatred never ends through hatred. By love alone does it end. Sensan says, when love and hate are both absent, everything becomes clear and undisguised. Make the smallest distinction, and heaven and earth are set infinitely far apart. We are so judgmental. And we also have the capacity to understand people. And when we do that, we lose some of our anger and we can talk to them. So what I would recommend is everybody realize we're caught up in endless streams of outrage. And you as an individual can step out of it, can reach out to people, can try to understand them. I recommend especially the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. It'll give you almost a social superpower. You have the capacity to actually persuade people, to actually connect with people. And social media pulls us into this conflict mindset, but you'll be much more successful in life if you try to understand people, persuade them, and learn to work with them. At very least, it'll help you in your own marriage and with your own children.
And related, I know we're already over time, but there's another really good question. It also will help tie a bow on this. There's a question from Facebook, John Hepworth. Is there a way to detoxify social media? You're having these debates. I know Facebook is struggling. Do you take off certain posts, and even if they're from the president or not? And there's really kind of a no-win situation. You're going to make someone upset, and then there's free speech rights, but then there's the hate. There's all these things. What would you do if you were Mark Zuckerberg? Would you edit speech? Would you change the platform in some way to make it less detoxify it?
Yes, I think it's essential that we make the platforms less toxic. There was a report in the Wall Street Journal a month ago about how Facebook had studied polarization. They had thought about ways to reduce the degree to which it exacerbates polarization, and they dropped it. So I think Facebook bears a lot of responsibility here. There's a lot more that they could be doing. Twitter has hardly any social psychologists on its staff. I think Twitter needs to really start studying these issues. They've taken a couple of steps here and there. I have an article in The Atlantic with Tobias Rose Stockwell in last November, in which we laid out a few steps that could be done. One is to add friction here and there when you're about to post something that seems to be particularly aggressive or toxic. You can add little bits of friction, but that's a small thing. More algorithm accountability. Most people are pretty reasonable. This is wherever I go. Most people are pretty reasonable, but the algorithms give much more voice to the people at the extremes, the people who are not reasonable, because they generate engagement. We need to understand those algorithms, and there needs to be some public comment on them, some way to change the algorithms. I think the biggest bang is going to come when we find ways not to have to go after each individual post, but to reward users who are civil and show some nuance and some constructiveness. And so, if I could, mark people who I think are particularly or no, not me marking. If there were ways to code for integrative complexity or civility or constructiveness, if the platforms could code for things so that I could set, I don't want anybody who scores 0. I don't want trolls who just, their content is very predictable. I want to cut them out so that they don't see me, I don't see them. We would all have a much, much better life on social media. So I think this is one of the trends. If this keeps going on, I think our public square, our ability to talk to each other is in big trouble. I think we're going to have major reforms to social media that makes it less nasty, less conspiracy generating, less outrage generating.
And, one question, and I know I keep asking you questions over time, but I mean, it sounds like some of these reforms would just be bad business for these companies, because obviously it's oftentimes the more extreme statements, the things that are generating outrage, that get you sucked in, that make you want to comment, that make you click on something. And it's not just social media, as you mentioned, our mainstream media or TV media or print media has also they've also discovered this business model.
That's right. Yes, as many have commented, the business model is such that we are not the customers; it's the advertisers who are the customers. We're the tuna fish that gets hooked on the hook and delivered to the customers in a sense. So yes, the business model will have to change ultimately. But I would put it this way. So I teach a course at NYU Stern on professional responsibility. It's our ethics course. And one of the things that becomes clear when you look at all these cases is that in the short run, cheating often pays. But in the long run, ethics generally does pay. And so, in the long run, if people really hate Facebook, and the more, we're seeing now this month, boycotts can be extremely costly. And if there's all kinds of people want to boycott something, well, if someone comes up with a better product that is not does not lead to such toxicity, people, Facebook would lose market share. So in the long run, I think ethics pays, and also most of the the people I met in Silicon Valley. It's full of idealistic people who really think or want to believe that they're making the world better. So I am hopeful that some big changes will happen, but big changes have to happen.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan, you've given us so much to think about. I encourage everyone to take a look at all of Jonathan's writing. And what was it? You said thecoddling.com?
You go to thecoddling.com. Yeah, you can get to everywhere else from there.
To get some more data. But Jonathan, thank you so much. This was extremely insightful and given me a lot to think about.
Great. My pleasure, Sal. Thanks for all that you and your team do to educate the world.
Appreciate it. Sarah. So thanks everyone for joining. As always, these conversations, I don't know, I enter into them saying, oh yeah, I got maybe 10 minutes worth of questions, and then we realize 40 minutes go by. So thanks for joining. As you saw, Jonathan, fascinating his research. I could spend several hours on every one of those topics we talked about. But thanks for joining this week. And I think we're off to, well, actually, I'm not going to say that. I think we're off tomorrow, but we will see. But I will see you at the next live stream. See you then.